Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are here with our December author, a little bit late, but here nonetheless. Ann, I'm probably going to butcher your last name, Napolitano.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, well, there you go. Look at me. So she wrote our December book, which was Dear Edward, and to much crowd. Well, we had really mixed feelings about it because everybody's like, it's the holidays. Why are we reading this sad book? But then lots of people felt it was uplifting at the end. And I didn't actually think it was, I mean, obviously the initial premise is sad, but I thought it was a perfect book to read actually at that time. But that was not echoed through the entire club, but everybody agreed that it was a very, very profoundly moving and important book. So
Thank
got
you.
there in the end. To introduce Anne, I'm going to just read her very short bio here. Just let somebody else in. Anne's new novel, Dear Edward, was published by Dial Press in January 2020 and was an instant New York Times bestseller. She's the author of many other novels, including A Good Hard Look and Within Arm's Reach. She was the associate editor of One Story Literary Magazine, and she received an MFA from New York University. She has taught fiction writing for Brooklyn College MFA program, New York University School of Continuing and Professional Studies, and for Gotham Writers Workshop. She was also longlisted in November 2019 for the Simpson Joyce Carol Oates Literary Prize. Her first novel, Within Arm's Reach, was published in the United States by Crown Publishing, in the United Kingdom by Time Warner, and in multiple other countries, in Germany as well. It was also adapted and staged as a theatrical production in New York City in 2014, which we will have to ask you about. Anne lives in Brooklyn with her husband and 2 children. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
So usually our very first question, and ladies, anybody who would like to ask a question to Anne, if you want to ask live or you want to just, somebody's already got their hand up, look at that. If you want to ask it in the chat window, you can absolutely do that because we love audience interaction, of course. So just to start off though, Anne, how did you get into writing initially? Was this something you were born to do or?
Well, very early. I mean, I was immediately a voracious reader. And then in 4th grade, that you get those vocabulary assignments where you get like a list of 10 words and you have to put them into sentences in elementary school. And we were given it once in 4th grade, but for the first time, the teacher said to put all the words into sentences, but join the sentences together so they make sense as like a little scene or paragraph or something, as opposed to like separate sentences. And so I went home to do the homework and I wrote the 10 sentences or whatever that joined together. And I looked up at the clock and I thought it had taken me 5 minutes, and it turned out 45 minutes had passed. And that it just blew my mind because it was the first time outside of play that time had disappeared like that. And I was like, oh, this is like magic. This is this amazing portal to this other world. And so I decided that day, and I started to write a novel the next day. And I wrote like 10 pages about like a wartime orphan. And then I, obviously put that aside. And then like a year later, I started to write a novel about a wartime nurse because I had decided apparently that I wanted to be a serious novelist, and serious novelists wrote about war, even though I knew nothing about war or orphans or nurses. So basically from there, it was what I wanted to do, but I am very shy, and I was paralyzingly shy when I was a kid. So I, to a large extent, didn't tell anyone. So it was like a secret passion for a long time.
Now, when you say secret passion, how secret? Like, did your parents know, or you were like in the closet writing?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not like anyone is interested if they see you, you're writing, you appear to be writing a lot when you're doing homework, etc.
Sure.
Everyone in my life, my parents knew that I was like an insane reader. Like I read just incessantly. So like I was known as like a bookworm, but nobody knew that I wanted to be a writer. So no, I didn't tell anyone. And I didn't I didn't publish. What happened was that when I applied to college, I decided that I wanted to go to a college that had a creative writing program, like as a minor or whatever. And a lot of colleges at that point, this is a long time ago, didn't have creative writing programs. So that actually that was helpful because it limited my list. I decided that I wanted a college that had a creative writing program and didn't have fraternities, because like I said, the real shy thing, I'm not a good mix with like a massive keg party is not a good scene for me. So those were like the two criteria I used to apply to college. So that was the first time that I, was external in any way. And that was really because I wanted to take classes in writing.
So then move along a couple of years. What does it look like then, like for your first book? What is that experience like?
Well, that's many years.
Yeah.
What happened was I went to graduate school to NYU for creative writing. I wrote a novel while I was in graduate school, and the first novel that I finished, having written, starts when I was a child, I actually wrote a novel, and I sent it out, or sent like that. You send like 30 pages. You send 30 pages to agents, and I sent it out to agents, and I got rejected by 80 agents. Some of them wrote like in handwriting in the margin and, wrote something nice, but 80 agents rejected it. And I was like, okay, that's a lot. And so I put that book away, and I got a job as a personal assistant and to make a living. And I started to write another book. I wrote another novel, and then I sent that out again to get agents. At this point, I'm like 27 or something like that. And I had 3 agents that wanted to represent me. And I was like, this is amazing. And so I got to choose between the 3 agents. I chose the one that I was the most excited by. And then she sent that novel out, and it didn't sell. So no publisher bought it. An editor almost bought it. Then like her boss went on maternity leave, and it didn't sell. And that was like the real blow, because I am a novelist, and basically I've never published a short story. So I was then at that point in my late 20s, and I'd never published anything. And everyone in my life at that point knew I wanted to be a writer. I was a personal assistant in order to like pay the bills. It wasn't obviously my career. I had a graduate degree, and my father started sending me brochures for law school in the mail. He thought I should go to law school. And I got depressed because I was like, I don't know what, I had failed with like a big capital F. And I was like, I don't know what else I can do, but I should do something else. And then I found that the only way for me to climb out of the depression was to write. So I started writing again, literally just to make myself feel better, so that I wasn't in a pit of depression all the time. And that was actually a very freeing experience, because I realized at that point that I was going to keep writing, and that I needed to write in order to be a fully functional, realized human being. And that even if I never published a word, which at that point I figured was pretty likely, I was a writer. I was going to write. And so that took a huge weight off. And I, at that point, started writing another novel, and that is Within Arm's Reach, which is my first novel to sell. And at that point I was 31, I think, which I realize is not that old, but it was, that was all I was trying to do the whole time.
I love this story, actually. I mean, it's obviously, it probably wasn't easy when you were going through it, but I'm just like talking about like not having that pressure like on yourself to do it, and like sort of like that allowed you to actually become who you needed to become.
Yeah, no, it was a very important moment for me, and it continues to, like, the weight has permanently been off since then, because I realized that like it's what brings me joy, it's what keeps me from being depressed. It's like it's just part of like what I need to do to be me and to be the best version of me. And that's fully separate from publishing or success or, anything like that. So I feel very fortunate that happened.
It's almost like something so many authors or want to be authors need to hear. Nobody can tell you you can't be a writer.
Right, absolutely. And also, you don't have to be like me, like as obsessive as I was to be a writer. I teach writing, and I just recently taught a class about crafting your life as a writer. And I reference this great thing that Elizabeth Gilbert, who
Mhm.
wrote Big Magic and Eat, Pray, Love and whatnot. But she does these great talks, and she says this thing that I love, which I always talk about in class, that there are two kinds of people in the world. There are jackhammers and there are hummingbirds. And the jackhammers are people like me who are like born with this. You picture like a jackhammer would like going, I'm a writer, I'm a writer, I'm a writer, I'm a writer. And like basically since fourth grade, my internal voice has been saying that. And I'm like, I just write and I keep trying and I keep trying and I keep trying. But then there are people, there are people who are not like that, many people who are not like that. And they're hummingbirds, and they may work on a novel for a year and then focus on activism and then take up quilting and then, like have a baby and not think about anything else. Like, and that is like just as worthy. And when you're 62, you could write an amazing novel as a hummingbird. It doesn't matter that you're not like as immersed in it as a lunatic like myself is. So I also like to say that because I feel like many people feel like they're not real writers because they don't write all the time and they're not insane. And that's not true. Like there's no like badge that you get. It's just like, what do you love? What do you need to do right now to be the best version of yourself? Like what makes you whole?
I feel like that would help so many people that are struggling with, because I, in the work I'm in, I come across a lot of want to be published authors.
Yeah, it's hard.
Um,
It's hard. You shouldn't pay attention to the goal.
yeah.
You want to stay focused on the work.
Before we switch gears completely and go into the book, because obviously everybody's read it, so it's always nice to talk about the actual plot and characters. But I just wanted to mention that I see that Whitney Frick was your editor, and I actually worked with her on another title before she left Flatiron, and I just love her. She's amazing. So I just noticed that, and I thought that was funny.
No, she's the best.
All right, so ladies, again, if anybody has any questions, or there was a hand up, but it got put down. So if anybody wants to ask Ann any questions live, then you're absolutely welcome to, and you can use the chat window if you'd prefer to ask them that way. But let's dive right into the actual book. Let's talk about, how did you do your research? You wrote a little bit that it was based on I believe 2 real plane crashes from 2010 on its way to London and crashed in Libya with one sole survivor. And not only did they survive, but they lived. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I just became obsessed with this real crash. And the obsession was a surprise to me because I have no prior interest in plane crashes or aeronautics or anything like that. But this crash with this, so the flight was from South Africa bound for London, and it crashed in Libya. It was mostly Dutch passengers on board that were on their way home from vacation. And when it crashed, one little boy, his seat was basically like ejected out of the plane, and they found him a mile away from the rest of the wreckage. And he was still buckled into his airplane seat, and he had a punctured lung and a broken leg, but he was otherwise fine. And everyone else on board, including his parents and his brother, had died immediately. And I couldn't read enough about this story like right away. I have 2 boys, and at the time they were 1 and 3. And the idea of what this little boy could possibly be going through, and the idea that he had to get out of that hospital bed and walk out of the hospital without his mom and his dad and his brother and go into a completely new world and life was so horrifying to me that how could you expect him to be okay? And could he be okay? His aunt and uncle adopted him. And they did an amazing job. Like from the very first minute, they did an amazing job of protecting his privacy. They actually like blacked out the windows of their station wagons so the press couldn't take pictures of him. They never gave an interview, which is all what they should have done. They did a great job. And then also the other thing that fascinated me was that in 2010, which is when the crash happened, was really the first time that social media was like what we would recognize it as today. 2010 was the first time that everyone you knew was on Facebook, like including your mother. In like 2009, that wasn't true. 2010, for the first time, it was like on the cover of all the newspapers, CNN, everything. You also saw online, like Facebook accounts got set up for this little boy made by girls his own age who thought he was cute and were like devastated for him. And there were airplane aficionados who were speculating online as to why they thought the flight might have crashed. There was someone inside the hospital where the boy was, who leaked to the press that the president of Libya had called this little boy in his hospital room to wish him well, which like blew my mind. But you wouldn't have found that out, and it was leaked onto the internet. So it was really interesting to me that there was this like 365-degree view where like normal people were weighing in this public way on this event, and that had never been the case because it hadn't been possible before. So I think that's part of it. It was the two things, this little boy and how could he be okay? Because I didn't know if he could. And that's really what led me into the book, because I wanted to find out. I didn't know. And I knew that I felt that I had to walk through that kind of situation through another little boy to figure it out. Someone had a hand up.
Joanne, let's go ahead.
There, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yep.
You are, yep.
Okay, good. That's so fascinating what you're talking about there, and our group loved the book. They really got into it, and it provided so many deep conversations at our last meet. Your characters, some of them, I'm like the older lady, I forget her name. We were all vibrating. We wanted to say, shut up, leave this little boy alone.
No.
Do you have a favorite character out of the whole book?
Yes. I mean, it's cheating to say Edward. He's my favorite character, but outside of Edward, I think it's actually Principal Arundi, the principal for the school that he goes to. I didn't know that he was going to be in the book. When Edward went to the school for the first time, I sort of walked through that day with him, and someone tapped him on the shoulder, and I was like, who's that? And Edward turns around, and I was like, oh, it's the principal. That makes sense. Like the principal would probably reach out to this kid on this day. You know, it's a small town school, after what he's been through. And then so Edward follows him to his office, and when he opened the door, I was like, what's this? All these plants. So like there are a lot of things I plan or I think of ahead of time, and then a lot of things just happen. And generally it's like being a reader, basically. Like it's an act of discovery while I'm writing. And consistently, Principal Arundi, he showed up basically as himself. Shay showed up as herself, although I knew there was going to be a girl next door. And those are the characters that delight me, because in a way they're not work, like, because they take care of themselves, and I really like them a lot.
Thank you so much. That makes sense. Characters that take care of themselves.
Yeah.
They just morph into the story. Love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joanne, for asking. So the next, so I have all these questions, just amalgamated from emails and social media. Here's the next one, and I can't tell you even who sent this one to me, but it was somewhat surprising that we got to meet and get to know these characters when we already knew that they died. It paid off in the long run, but initially I was frustrated by the way that unfolded. Was that challenging to write?
Well, I knew from the very beginning, like from wanting to write this story, I knew right away that I was going to put the two storylines side by side. I wasn't really conscious of why, but I felt inherently that day was so massively important in Edward's life that it was equal in weight to anything that happened to it after that, and that he carried it inside of him and would carry it inside of him for the rest of his life. So it seemed right to me that it sat side by side with his story after the crash, because the two things for him really are continuously going on together. And then the second thing was that I wanted to show that the people on the plane are just as important as the people on the ground. Like we do have, obviously, it's like a sanity mechanism for us, but we're like, well, he died, like, I'm important because I'm still alive, and I'm sad he died, but he's dead. But those people shouldn't have died. And they are just as like vivid and interesting and important as anyone who continues to live. So I wanted them to sort of remain alive in the sky for as much of the book as possible. Also, I don't think I wanted to write about a plane crash. So this way I got to put off having to write about a plane crash until the very end, as opposed to starting with everyone dead, because that's not really what interested me. What interested me was, how does Edward go on? And then who are these people that he spends that day with on the plane?
Okay. So another question that I actually had myself was, Eddie became Edward after the accident. What did this signify to you?
It seemed like it was his life was so different that he needed to take it on with a different name. Like that he could never be Eddie again. Eddie was the child of his parents and the brother of Jordan. And that boy died on that day, as well as everyone else. And the person who ended up in the hospital had to be someone different. And that to try to be both would have killed him. So it was something underlying that. It was helpful to him that his aunt, gave him that moniker. So he didn't have to do it himself, but that, sat very well with him.
The before and the after. Young has a question here, and I think she just wants you to elaborate on Edward's relationship with his Aunt Lacey at the beginning of the book, and then how it changed by the end.
I think Lacey is the least capable in the book of being helpful, like truly helpful to Edward. And there's like more than one reason for that. She always wanted a baby, and he is not a baby, and he's been through this, unthinkably awful experience. And she's not an emotionally a nuanced person to be able to meet him where he is. And then also her sister died that day, which was her only family in the world other than her husband. And so she's devastated when he comes into her life. And it also propels her to stop trying to have children of her own. So she's going through this really complicated moment where she and her husband have been sort of estranged over this infertility issue. So when he comes into her life, she's like very incapable of being helpful to him. So them sitting together and watching General Hospital is like the best and most healing thing for both of them. Because really they're both trying to recover together. She can't really be the adult for him. And also he doesn't, which is okay, I think, because he couldn't accept a new mother and father. And really, I think that's why he goes and sleeps next door, because to pretend to be in a family feels so wrong to him. And then I think as the book goes on, Lacey gets her feet under her and she begins to sort of confront what's going on in her marriage. And through the sort of opening up of Edward and the honesty that happens in the latter part of the book, she ends up in a better place. And they end up in a better place. But I don't think Lacey's the kind of person, I think her full love for him, which is there the whole time, but really is there at the end of the book, is still not going to be like their best friends. She does the best she can.
I really appreciated Lacey and John. They surprisingly won me over, and I didn't see it coming. But you touched on a very difficult subject that affects so many, infertility. And I thought you wrote about it so beautifully. Actually, I don't know if beautifully is the word, but it felt very real, and it was hard to read at times. It's an strange experience because clearly Edward had gone through this horrible tragedy beyond your wildest dreams. But then on the other side, we had this everyday sadness that Lacey and John were both dealing with. So I really appreciated the juxtaposition.
Thank you. I also felt like there is literally no convenient time for a child to crash into your life and for you to have to take them. Like, there's no way you could be like, well, my life is boring and easy and I'm ready. I could ready, like none of us feel that way. Like I think about moving and I'm like, well, this is not a good time, but it's like that thing where it's never a good time to move. And there's never, like there's always something going on in your life that makes it feel like this is impossible. And he arrives in their life in a time that feels impossible, but that's just the way that life works. So I didn't want them to be waiting there with like a vacuum cleaner and a lasagna, because that didn't feel true to me.
Fair. So we talked about this a little bit, but Edward's trauma, obviously it's like, that's pretty much what the book is about, and how does a child go through something like this, and can he be okay? How did you research that experience?
Yeah, I read psychology. I read a lot about soul survivors, and there's actually a great like 1 hour documentary called Soul Survivor that ran on CNN while I was writing the book, but actually it was like on Kickstarter in the beginning, and I contributed to it because I was like, I need this movie. So I did a lot of reading in that way, but mostly what I had to, the plain sections of the book, which obviously had a very clear beginning, middle, and end, those characters were trapped in basically a moving silver bus. So like only so many things could happen on the plane. That was fairly easy and straightforward for me to write. And I didn't change a lot once I had written it. It's the Edward progression that I wrote and rewrote and rewrote. It took me 8 years to write the book, and most of the rewriting was with Edward, because what I found that I needed to do was to take tiny steps and feel if they felt like emotionally true, like with like an emotional tuning fork. And I would go too big or too small, or he'd be too depressed, or he'd be too okay, or it'd be feel melodramatic, or it was like all these micro steps that I then would like pull back and be, so like that's how I spent the years of writing the book basically. But for me, it's like, does this sentence feel true? Does this moment feel true? Do I believe it? And that's when I said I had to figure out whether he could be okay. That was really what I was trying to do. And it had to be true to me, or else there was no point in me writing it, or, that would be terrible. So that was the challenge of this book, was sentence by sentence, moment by moment, this being true. And of course, healing, which is a debatable word anyway in this context, but it's not linear. So it's not like every day you get a little better, every day you feel a little better. There are moments that set you back. There are moments of like stagnation. And he has those in the book too. Like for instance, when he opens the boxes that have his brother's clothes in them, and he wears his brother's clothes. Like there are these moments that just like lance him anew. And then later on, when he finds the letters, that's like an accelerant, where finally he has something that he can engage with, and he really realizes that he was not alone in this experience, and that he has like steps he can take and people he can try to help. And so, but it was very hard to figure out the sort of staggering of his experience and the truthful moments within it. Yeah, that was where I suffered.
Well, I mean, it felt, reading it, I mean, obviously I don't know anybody who's gone through this experience, or
Maybe,
but-
well,
yeah, knock on wood.
yeah, well, yes. I mean, there's like something though that the CNN documentary is really interesting, and there's something like, well, at that time there were like 8 soul survivors of plane crashes alive in the world. So I mean, it's a 2 hands full. It's not a lot of people.
But it felt very real. And I mean, I think one of the things you sort of touched on is sort of indifference, because you did approach sort of suicide at one point, but he wasn't suicidal ever, but like just the indifference with life. He had lost everything worth living for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Sorry.
No, you wipe everything out, and at that age too, like where you're growing, like he's prepubescent and then pubescent. It's a coming of age whether you lost everything or not, and you don't know who you are when you're those ages. So it's a tricky journey.
Edward and his brother shared a very special bond, and it seemed extremely mature of Edward to realize the importance of that relationship. At one point, he said it was harder for him to accept his brother was gone than his parents, because he was supposed to do life with his brother, and he would have lost his parents eventually. That was very poignant.
Yeah, that occurred to me early on, really because of my two sons. Partly because I think if I had started writing the book before them, I'm not actually of the belief that becoming a parent changes you as a writer. And I don't like that narrative. I don't believe it's true. I don't think you need to be a writer to be able to write about children or motherhood or anything like that. But my specific experience of parenting these two boys was partly that when they're 2 years apart, which is what I think Jordan and Eddie are 2 years apart. They might be 3. But when I brought my younger son home from the hospital when he was born, his 2-year-old brother, it was like they were reunited as opposed to being introduced to each other. And like from that minute, largely because of who my older son is, they just were deeply in love with each other. And I hadn't anticipated that, because I have a brother and a sister. We just squabbled through our entire childhoods. It was like, we loved each other, but it was a series of like stealing things from each other and telling on each other and beating each other up. And, it was low-key warfare, lovingly done. So the devotion that my two boys point at each other, and they're now 14 and 12, and it's the same way. And my husband and I take no credit for it. I just didn't anticipate that as a possibility. And I feel really lucky that they just happen to love each other so much. So that fed into, but the two boys in the book are not like my boys. And my boys were so young when I started writing it, that there was no way I could have known who they were anyway. But the love that they have for each other is very similar to the love that I see happening in front of me. And the idea of separating the two of them is unthinkable. And that made me realize that it would be easier for my boys to lose my husband or I than it would be for them to lose each other. And also, when you do think about it, you go to college, you have a relationship, you move across country, you are supposed to leave your parents. That's part of the arc of growing up. But you're not, supposed to leave your sibling out of your life. So it was those two things that tied into their relationship.
I have 2 children, but I have not had the same experience as you.
It's and I take
it was
0.
beautiful though. That's so nice to hear that it's based on reality.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really my mother has 5 brothers and sisters, and 3 of them are really close, and then they barely speak to the other. It's very random. I feel like if I'd had 10 children, these would have been the 2 that adored each other. It was just pure luck.
All right, Rita's got a question here. She says, curious as how, so I'm guessing you're talking about the audiobook. She's curious as to how you picked the narrator and why you picked a female versus male. Also, did you talk to anyone from the Soul Survivor documentary as research?
No, I didn't talk to anybody from the documentary. It actually came out in the last year of my writing. So, and I intentionally didn't speak to anyone. I didn't speak to anyone from the crash in 2010. I would never have reached out to the boy or his family. The last thing I would want to do would be disturb their privacy. For me, because I had to figure out the story as I went and chart it emotionally, having more facts and actual information that is confusing to me, because then I would feel like I should follow the path of what happened, whether it be someone in the Soul Survivor movie or the boy, the Dutch boy. So I intentionally took in as much as I could read and see, and then processed by myself. So that was intentional. And the narrator, my agent, who I adore and is wonderful, she was there's like 3 narrators who I love and I want one of them. And I was like, okay. So like, I think she just, the woman read. I don't even think I had much to do with it, because I was like, okay, if you think that this is the right person. And actually I had happened to have heard that the woman who narrated Dear Edward also narrated, among many, many other things, I want to call it the Swamp Book. What the heck is it called? It sold a bajillion copies.
Crawdads, where the crawdads sing?
Yes, Where Do the Crawdads Sing? Which I happen to have just listened to shortly before she signed on. And I mean, I haven't listened to the audiobook because, I mean, I've heard snippets, but like, I can't listen to my book. And also, I think actually it would be weird for me because I'm like, it's the Crawdads lady. But I mean, she is a wonderful reader. So I had very little to do with it.
That's a funny answer. Okay, I was surprised by the sheer number of family members that wrote to Edward and asked him how to do something with his life now that their loved ones couldn't. And I mean, you kind of just answered this, but I wanted to know if there was any evidence that Reuben van Assu received letters like this, but perhaps you kind of just said that you didn't really wanted to follow what had happened to him.
No, and I mean, unless I had reached out to them and asked for information, which I wouldn't have done, there was no information on him. It's not like, you know, if they had done like a big profile on him, I would have read it. I mean, I definitely Googled him, etc. But he was on like a talk show in Holland a couple of years ago when he was like 19, looks obviously like a grown man, and he was speaking in Dutch. But it was about like recovering from or getting over something painful. But that was the first time I had seen him, you know, do anything public facing. And the letters, I had heard of people getting letters after accidents. And when I thought about it, I thought that if my husband was on a flight and the flight crashed and everyone on it died except for one child, I consider myself to be like a fairly sane, level-headed human being. And I don't think I would not reach out to that child, but I probably would put a Google alert on that child because I would be invested in what happened to that person, because that person moved on after something that the person I loved was unable to, and all these other people were unable to. Like, it was like walked into a future that didn't exist for the other 190 people on the plane. And I could see how in the grief and shock of the immediacy after the crash and the heartbreak, that if you weren't necessarily as level and sane's like a strong word, but that you would want to reach out to that kid in the same way that I would want to put a Google alert on it and just be like, just touch that person in some way to be like, you went on and you were sitting near the person that I loved and you were the last person alive who was near him. So I think there is some human desire to connect in their grief that felt truthful to me. And it was the most helpful thing. It was wildly unfair to write to a 12-year-old and put any expectations on him in that situation, or any situation, really. You shouldn't be writing to a 12-year-old. But I mean, the fact that his uncle put the letters away and that he found them when he was older, that ends up being a really catalyzing situation for him. And it allows him to meet his brother's girlfriend who he didn't know about. And it sort of widens his life in a way that it needed to be widened again after the plane crash really shut it down.
I appreciated it as a vehicle to find out more about what happened to these people, for sure.
Yeah.
Linda and Greg, I just like, drove me nuts. I just wanted him to know. And I was like, there's no way for him to know.
Yeah, I know. And like it's like all the stuff that the particulars of that kind of situation was also interesting to me. Like when I was like right around 9/11, actually, like 2 months later, there was a major plane crash in Queens. where a flight lost a wing like over Long Island and crashed into a neighborhood. And of course, I was living here and I remember that. And so I looked into it and found out that the survivors, not the survivors, the families of the people who died on that crash, and everyone died, I believe, they all got $1 million. Like, it was like, there's all these interesting, but like her boyfriend would not get $1 million because he was her boyfriend.
Yeah.
You know, so like there's all these also, and like Jordan's girlfriend was never told by anyone. She had to see it in the news because nobody knew that she was his girlfriend. So like that was interesting to me too. Like our heartstrings are not all legalized and documented in a way that get respected by the law or insurance companies or anything like that. So, but Edward respects that, and he's able to pay homage to those connections on his own, which is pretty nice.
Money, the money was interesting to me too, because it's such a hard thing, because in any great tragedy, when there's money paid, like money doesn't bring anybody back. So it's such like a hard thing to sort of wrap your head around, because there's in large sums of it trading places in some way trying to pay for someone's life, but it just can't, right?
Yeah. And I mean, Edward, fairly early in an early draft, those letters turned up, and I didn't know that was going to happen. And then I also didn't know that Mark Lassio's brother was going to give Edward this other vast amount of money. And I was irritated for like 4 years that had happened, because I couldn't figure out, I was like, it's not helpful. Like, he doesn't need the money. The money doesn't help him. He's not nourished by, receiving the money. He doesn't need the money. And what is he going to do with this money? Like, he already has money coming. It was just annoying to me. And frustrating, but I couldn't make it go away. And it was only like in the last year where I finally figured out how he could use it to be proactive and to make a difference. But yeah, money. So all the money stuff was interesting because it's so arbitrary too. Like that the survivors get $1 million and then he would get more because he lost more people, and so peculiar. And as you say, not really a recompense for what they've lost. Oh, Joanne has her hand up again.
Hi, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, just what you just said twigged in my mind. Then if you get a piece of the story that's bugging you or annoying you, how do you just not scratch it out and toss it aside? Does it just keep coming back to you?
Yeah, I try to cut it out. But I also try to stay open, because I try to be respectful of what comes to me like that. And usually they cut, like if it's kind of out there, it comes for a reason. And I've found that if I fight it and fight it and fight it, I really am just like fighting with the book, and that doesn't serve the story. So I try to like sort of let it be there, but like in my peripheral vision. And I'm just like, I'll just figure, I'll deal with you later. Either you're going to leave later and I'm going to cut you out, or somehow I'm going to figure this out. So that's what I did with that. But that's only because I've learned after really battling. My second novel, A Good Hard Look, has the real short story writer, Flannery O'Connor, is a character in that book. And she showed up a year into me writing a book that was set in the present day. And I was not happy about that. And I spent like years fighting, trying to get Flannery O'Connor out of that book. And that taught me a lesson, because she had to be in the book. And I just wasted, 3 years being unhappy about it. Dumb.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Sure. I should say too, I guess, because it might be of interest, is that Dear Edward's going to be like you were saying about like Gary didn't find out. I don't know, maybe things will be more possible in a more long-term format. Maybe.
Sorry, I think I was muted there.
Oh, yeah.
All right, well, we have come to the end of our time. Just to close out, can you tell us what you're working on next?
Sure. I'm working on a novel that'll come out supposedly next spring. So like March 2023, it should be out. I'm in a final revision of it now. Also with Whitney Frick, you know, she's still my editor again. And everything could change, but it's called Hello, Beautiful. And it is set in Chicago it goes from 1960 to 2011. And it's about 4 sisters that grow up in Chicago, and 2 of the sisters end up marrying the same man, not at the same time. And that's how I'm talking about it now, but there's a lot more to it, obviously, but that's the gist of it.
Well, we will look forward to that. I like historical fiction that is like not as historical as most historical fiction. So one of my favorite books is The Great Alone, which is Alaska in the 70s. So
oh yeah, beautiful book.
Yeah. So anyways, I am excited to read that as well. Thank you so much for being with us. Ladies, thank you for joining us tonight and for answering all of our probing questions, Anne. And we can't wait to see what comes next.
All right. Thank you so much.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.